I am delighted today to welcome Felicity Dwyer to the show. Felicity helps individuals and teams to connect and communicate so that people feel heard and understood. Her style is warm, engaging, and inclusive. With Felicity as your podcast guest, I'm told, you can expect lively conversation and practical takeaways for your listeners. So this is what I'm being told. So we need to make sure we tick those at the end. She is passionate about lifelong learning and has worked in adult learning and development for over 20 years. As a facilitator, trainer, speaker, and coach, she has helped people to become great communicators, managers, and leaders. She is qualified in numerous development methodologies and works with managers and staff across the public, private and voluntary sectors. And she's got a book, as those watching you can see in the back there, she has a new book out, it's been out a while now, she said, called Crafting Connection. And so we're bound to be talking about that and how we get on with those sort of things. So welcome, Felicity.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you for inviting me on as your guest. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I'll butcher the intro as I always do. So tell us a little bit more about you and your career. Obviously, you've got a long career in helping people, as you say, become great communicators, leaders, managers. How did you get into all this? What sort of?
Well, I've been self-employed for 20 years, but prior to that, I worked in the voluntary sector in an organisation that was involved with strategic skills development. And I could have got that job because I've always been passionate about learning and self-directed learning. So that got me into this organisation. And I think there was a point there. I mean, I was managing small projects at the time, and I was managing communications within a team. And there was a point at which I realised I would like to be out there working directly with people rather than just being a little bit more at the back end, desk based. So that's what sort of led me to make the transition out into the freelance world. And there was a point in this organisation where we had the opportunity to work in learning groups, so peer learning groups. And I just found the process of coming together with people across the organisation, sharing our challenges, exploring, what we wanted to develop ourselves as well as to get better in our roles. I found that process fascinating. And we had a facilitator, an external expert facilitator, and I was watching what she did. And not only did I really benefit from being in the group, but I was looking at her role and thinking, oh, that's something I'd like to do. So it's little sparks like that. I felt I had role models, and she later became a mentor, a colleague. So, I've worked with her on and off for the past 20 years, this individual. But that's what sort of sparked me in thinking, oh, I could go into organisations and bring my skills in and help other people to learn and connect and work together more effectively. So that was a little bit of the spark behind it. And there's plenty more, but that's just one I'm going to share today.
Yeah, it's funny how you can see someone and think, yeah, that's what I want to do, and it can it's come from funny angles, can't it? Where you're not expecting it because you won't go into these sort of things. Think this is what's going to happen. So tell us about that first time when you started doing that sort of stuff. How did you go about it when you first started working for yourself?
I think when I started working for myself, I mean, firstly, I think it really helped that I was supported by the organisation I had been employed by, because I think that's quite helpful. So they did give me some work when I started out, and I managed to find a couple of other clients quite quickly, because of course you do have to have more than one client when you go self-employed. You can't just work for your employer, because that might not be looked on positively by the taxman. But I think that really helped. And to be honest, it took me a while to build up the facilitation, training and coaching side of my business, because I had been known as somebody who, was more of a manager, but also somebody who was responsible for communications, written communication. So I started out with quite a lot of writing good practice materials and this kind of thing, topics like leadership and I did, what did I do? do remember because it's a long time ago. Work experience, setting up a good work experience placement. I did training needs analysis, so I did a whole toolkit on that. So I did quite a lot of writing at first, and then gradually built up the training side. And in my 20 years, I'm not going to give you too much detail, but I have done a few things. I had a coaching practice. I ran an ILM centre for 12 years, just winding that side of the business down. And increasingly, I've done associate work as well, which I quite like because there's less of having to market yourself and more of actually doing the work that I love to do. So I think if you are setting up as a freelancer, you'll try things. You may need to gradually direct your career in the way you want to go. Something I've learned, and I think it's relevant to anyone, project managers or any other role, is when you're taking on work, thinking about what am I going to learn from this job, and is it going to take me in the direction I want? Because there is a bit of a trap, and I've fallen into this loads of times because we all need to get paid, of taking on work and getting known for work that I didn't necessarily want to do. So I think that's something I've learned over the years, is to really think a step ahead and think, what am I going to learn from this piece of work, this project, and how will that help me direct my career in the way I want? And for me, self-employment has allowed me to direct my own career. But even if you're employed or you're taking on contracts, project management contracts, always think a step ahead and think a bit strategically where you can, where you've got that luxury, I suppose, of not just having to take something to pay the bills, which sometimes you do, realistically.
Yeah, I can see that. It's something that it's funny. I'm trying to recall. I had a conversation sometime the other day about choosing projects and that mindset, if you like, of a project manager, because we're quite often as PMs, we're employees, quite a lot of different roles, but you're employees within an organisation, and those, but you're, even as an employee, you're kind of a freelancer within the organisation in some ways, aren't you, quite often? Because it's not like you've got that chain. You're going to be going around lots of different things, and you're going to get known for something. And like my career in the IT, a couple of times you get, I'll move into an area, and then if you spend 6 months there, you become known as the person who does telephony or the person who does infrastructure. And sometimes your ability to break out of that is quite hard. And I suppose the difference with freelance kind of work, and I know that my brother's a Harley Davidson mechanic, independent, works for himself, but he's a motorcycle mechanic, so people come to him with other things, and the other things quite often can be a pain in the backside because they're not that you know what I mean, they're not part of his niche. And he hasn't got it, well, he has the capability, the knowledge and things like that. It's just not giving him the same joy that you'd get from the things that he wants to do. And I think that's the same with us as project managers. It's where you do have that choice. Don't just take the next project, because sometimes you sit there thinking, if it's gone quiet, and you roll on to the next. Quite often you're rolling onto the next project while you're rolling off the last project that's just finishing, and you haven't even had time to breathe, think about what you learned, think about whether it's value, catch up on the skills side of it that you haven't done because you've been full on delivering. And I hear this conversation with a lot of PMs that I've worked with and have worked for me. And it is hard to turn around and go, actually, I don't want that, because there's a risk associated with, I don't want that. If you're freelancing, it's money. I know you can't get it under the crude, it's money, or it might be a customer that you want to work with, but it's not the thing you want to work with them for them with. And I can see how that can be difficult to make those decisions. But I think it makes you think about that from a leadership point of view anyway, and from a manager point of view, a whole career, whether it is easy just to go and do the work rather than do work that gives you, and that learning is a massive thing. Some of the projects I've learned lots on, I haven't realised I was going to learn on, and during the time I didn't realise I was learning, and really didn't want to be in those projects. But that's sometimes where you get that you hone your skills in those difficult roles. I suppose with seeing people where you're coaching in their leadership skills, coaching in those management skills, what sort of thing, and maybe if it's projects, as you know, it's project managers is my audience there, but maybe from a project manager, what do you see things that come up commonly where you think, yeah, it's this again, it's this again, it's this again, and not in a negative way. It's just that it's that common. There's going to be common themes. What do you what sort of things do you see?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ones clearly, and it depends on the levels you're working with. I tend to work with either first line managers, so people who are directly leading a team, and that might be a team for a small project. It might be a different kind of team, and also people who are more at the middle management level and have now got the point where they are having to often be that person who's managing up, but is also having to communicate down to their team. So they're starting to get a slightly more strategic role. They're starting to get more of a leadership role, but they're still not at that senior decision making role. So again, on the sort of small group courses and things we get people who are directly managing projects, and we get people who are in other management roles.
Yeah.
So, you know, my expertise is with working with managers rather than specifically project managers, but we do get project managers on our courses. And of course, with project management, I think some of the things that are working with potentially multidisciplinary teams and people under pressure to deliver, because there's often the deadlines. Often projects involve change, so you know you've got the challenge of the different ways that people engage with change. The other thing I see a lot with the newer managers is that stepping up, having the confidence and assertiveness to move from somebody who's doing the doing to somebody who is getting something done through other people, and that can involve, you know, a shift of mindset, different ways of communicating, the inner development that happens when you're a leader and you need to let go of some things, and you need to develop, particularly around the communication skills, which is the area I work, that interpersonal communication, to work perhaps in a different way with people. So that's probably quite a lot that I've said. So I'll but you know, lots. Those are some of the things that I've come across in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's especially when you're talking about the stepping up from a contributor to a manager role.
Yeah.
And I know I've got some. In fact, I was at our Christmas party last night. I was chatting to one of our sort of junior project managers, and just thinking about from their perspective, they're stepping into a role. And there's a perception of age as well that you get in organisations where someone has come in, they're moving through those, they're doing some of the smaller projects and delivering some stuff there, and they're doing really good work. And I suppose, whereas what would you see as the one? Obviously, delegation's probably the skill that a lot of them need to learn, but other than, and I think that one kind of steps out as being in quotes obvious, but people don't realise it's obvious and how to delegate, and there's tools to do, but realise that you can't do it all. But what other things do you see with those more first time managers? And I'm sure I know there's, because one of them was telling me that they listen to the podcast, so I know there's people who are in that role where they've just started in last 6-12 months as a project manager, as a manager. Let's forget project manager, as a manager of people. What couple of things do you focus on first in helping those people?
Well, a model that I find is helpful to people stepping into this management role is John Adair's 3 circles model. Right. The task, the team, and the individual. And that's because people are often, you know, come from being focused on the task. And clearly that's still important. I mean, leadership 101 is, you know, communicating the purpose of the team and making sure people know the objectives of what they're going for. But also you've got these other 2 areas. You've got working with the individuals, and for a new manager, that may be working with people who have been your peers. It may be working with people, if you're managing a project, from different disciplines. It may be communicating with stakeholders. So, you know, that's the wider area of individuals, but certainly you're working with the individuals within your team. So you need to be having conversations with them. You need to be finding out what motivates them. You need to be becoming aware of their skills and also what they're interested in. We talked earlier about, taking on jobs that will develop the skills you want. So, it's being an awareness of where your team members want to go in the long term can help you with the motivation side. And also you need to be aware of the team dynamics and potentially, some of the things that can get in the way of that are people being a little nervous of conflict. But actually, if you notice there's something within the team that is getting in the way of performance and it's actually due to some sort of conflict between people, there may be something that you need to do, whether it's a mediation role in, perhaps a small mediation role, or whether it's something with the way you structure your team meetings, very practical things that you might want to do to help people work together as a team. And I think those 3 circles just gives you a very simple but powerful map of areas you need to focus. And I think there's a couple of things managers can do. Firstly, think, where am I most comfortable? So am I most comfortable thinking about tasks and objective and milestones and so forth? Or am I most comfortable having those coaching conversations with individuals? Or am I really comfortable, facilitating a team meeting, supporting that side of it? So people will have their own natural areas where they're comfortable and they feel they're skilled. So that's a start. And it's partly looking at you, where do I need to develop my skills? And it's also looking at the team and thinking, okay, is there anything out of balance in those 3? And if so, is that where I need to focus my energies at the moment? So it's a simple model, but I think it's deceptively simple because it can give you a bit of a framework.
Simpler the model, the better is my mind.
Yeah.
I think I've banged on about the DISC model on this show multiple times, and there's a few different versions of it with different words on it and different colours and different things. But I like that because it's easy for my brain. I've got to ask 2 questions, and then I can kind of get a feeling of something, and it's that modifying yourself, and it's that self-awareness, isn't it? It's planning that, and that what you've just said there, that preference of where you like to be in those different roles will be quite interesting, because if you are that task person, you just want to get it done, I'm guessing you get dragged down into doing the stuff for people rather than helping them get it done. And then that's where you as a manager, you'll end up, why am I not doing that leadership role, doing alongside the team, and ending up just overloaded because you're not doing the things you need to do as a manager in your day. You can't do it in your day because you're doing it as well. So I can see that myself. I've done it myself. I found myself, and I do find myself dropping down into things that I really should be turning around and saying, can that person do it? And I have to make myself think about it, because I was in a conversation like this week, actually. I think, oh, well, I'm doing that anyway. And they're saying, we shouldn't be doing that. This person's there to do that for you. Yeah, but I can get it done quicker. But yeah, and we all, I assume that everyone at all levels in an organisation, and you'll probably be able to tell me this, but you've dealt with people, have that problem where it doesn't matter how senior you are, there are certain things that you just let yourself get dragged down into because that's your natural tendency. Is that something you see, do you think?
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple of things that can help. Firstly, it is just reminding yourself, what is my role as a manager, which is to get things done through other people. And it doesn't mean you won't be doing things yourself, but it's just taking a step back. And I think this can be particularly prevalent when you've been promoted, because you know your role really well, and therefore it's tempting to do it. The other thing which sort of picks up on that, I could do it more quickly myself, which is really common, particularly when we're talking about delegation.
There's me with spreadsheets.
A role of the manager is to develop people. So again, is my job to get this done as quickly as possible, and in an emergency, or if you're really up against the deadline, it may be fair enough, but it's always worth challenging yourself and saying, actually, or is my job is to equip my team so that more people are able to do this if I fell under the proverbial bus. And if you think about team resilience and creating a team that is not reliant on one person, then the more you can do to develop people, the more you're going to get better performance as a team in the longer run. And also you're building up capacity in the team if something happens unexpected. So I think it's really reminding yourself your role as the manager is not to do everything. You are not serving your team, and you're not serving the project outcomes, the stakeholders, if that's always your default. So once you recognize it in yourself, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a step back and remind myself. But when you're under pressure, it's a very human thing. So it's not about beating yourself up. It's just recognizing, okay, this is a pattern. I need to step back and think, okay, how can I develop somebody so they can do it? And is that the best use of my time at the moment? It might take longer, but is it actually in the long term the best use of my time?
Yeah, I get that. It's that thing where you're sitting there sometimes as well. It's about protecting the team, because I find myself doing that. Is that there'll be something where we need something done, need something quickly. I know they're busy. I know they've got loads of stuff on. I know that's going to cause, so I'll kind of go, well, I'll just do it. And I never think of that comment that you just made there. And I've always thought about the fact that delegation is about coaching, about teaching people to do it.
Yes.
But sometimes we'll do it as it is in a caring manner to protect people. And then if we step back and look at it, actually, well, we're not helping them develop. So therefore we're not doing the caring thing. It seems like the caring thing for your team, whereas actually the real caring thing would be let them stretch, let them push, work with them, say, look, I need you to do this. Can you get this done? I'm busy. Okay, let's work out what you can reshuffle, what you can do, and teach them how to do prioritization a bit better, so that then that gives them two sets of skills there, the thing you're getting them to do and a way of fitting stuff in and deciding. Or just coming to me and going, well, I don't have time to do it. Which one I've got these things to do. I think that one's the more important one that you've just given me. Are these two? Shall I drop that one? And go, and you as a manager would be able to say, well, yeah, drop that one. Anyone says anything, talk to me. Tell them, talk to me. I've told you, yes, yeah. It's more private. But having those conversations, because it's hard to have those conversations, because as an individual, you're thinking, I need to get all this done. Oh, they've given me something else to do. I've got to get all that done. Whereas sometimes you just got to push back and go, or you can either push back or you just sit there yourself and go, well, I'll take the noise for that. I'll take the noise for not doing that. I won't just say, well, no, I didn't do it. I had other priorities. I had to do it. You don't necessarily turn around and say, the boss gave me something extra to do, so I dropped that. It's just, that's the priority I made. That you can make that priority call, and you just take the flak for it. And if someone wants to escalate it, and you kind of talk to your manager and go, well, I made a decision that I needed to do that. I decided not to do that. And then if they say, well, you should have spoke to me first. Okay, fine. But I chose not to. We were kind of grown-ups, aren't we? And sometimes we don't take that. We don't feel we can make that grown-up decision, if you like. And I don't want to belittle that and suggest anything where people are being childish. It's just a case of we feel that we have those constraints of we must, whereas actually we can choose and accept consequences.
Yeah, and I think listening to you, I think there's a couple of important points. I think one thing when we do, exercises around, what makes a great manager, and coming up, a word that often comes up is approachable. So that idea of, you're not potentially overloading people, you're giving people, but if people know that it's safe to come to you and say, look, I'm just overwhelmed, I can't do everything, is it okay to drop this or ask for a bit of support? And I'm going to come back to coaching in a minute because I think it's really important. So I think it's partly making sure it's okay for people to come to us. The other thing,
how do you know if you're approachable?
Well, it's a really good question. I think it's really important. One of the things I think is really important is to create some psychological safety within a team. And that means a few things. I think it means partly not passing blame down, not having a blame culture, but having a series where if something goes wrong, it's okay. So let's look at what happened, what's some of the root causes of that, how might we avoid that in future? What's some of the things we can do differently? So it's very much it's avoiding that kind of "why did you do that" attitude. I think that that question why can be a bit loaded. I always say with why it's great to apply to a process. Why didn't this process work? But for an individual, it can be a bit confrontational. So it's like, okay, let's talk through what happened. Okay, what was the thinking behind that? So have those kind of open conversations. So not passing blame down. Really trying not to be judgmental. I mean, one of the things I talk about in my book is the real importance of listening with an open mind, with what I call gentle curiosity. So it's not a nosiness so much as just, I'm genuinely interested in what you think and how you feel about this. So not jumping to conclusions either, not making too many assumptions, but just bringing that, okay, I really genuinely want to understand what happened if something's gone wrong. So that attitude, rather than an attitude of blame, trying to blame people if things go wrong, and you touched on that as well. It's not helpful. It's about, okay, what can we learn from this? How can we, prevent this happening again? And the other thing I think is really important is the sort of coaching element, and at its simplest, it's asking a question rather than giving information. And a book I recommend on this, you may well have come across it, is The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stenier. And the subtitle is Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. And his sort of attitude is, as busy managers, you may not have time for long coaching conversations.
Yeah.
But if somebody comes to you and asks you something and you think that they may have the answer themselves, clearly if it's just a piece of factual information, they need you to give it to them. But if they come to you with a question, you might start with, something like, okay, well, I've got some ideas, but beforehand, what ideas have you have? How might you tackle this if I weren't around? So it's just encouraging people to think something through for themselves, because of course, as soon as you have to start thinking and articulating what you would do, often and if you don't, then, and you need to come in with some information, then you're actually coming in giving people something they don't know rather than telling them what they do know. So just those simple asking an open question rather than immediately jumping in and trying to be too helpful or too much telling.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I know I've got people.
It's a habit.
Yeah. And you want to fix stuff in my brain, and I do it with it's my default response with a lot of things in work, in family, and friends, sort of things. You want to fix the problem for someone, and if you've got an idea how you can fix it, but it can come across preachy and lectury, and you're the big I am and know how to fix everything. And I hear myself sometimes, and I think I've got to stop myself, because I'm giving too much to someone who knows it already, like you say, and that kind of, well, when they're stuck, and they really say they're stuck, you can give suggestions, or ask questions that will drive them down that route. But it's as you say, you've got to think really carefully about your responses, really carefully about, like you say, what they're saying, in order to make those responses right. And quite often we've got half an hour to talk about something. Oh, that bit of coaching is not going to be done because we talk about something else that's delivery or something like that comes into it. It gets muddy, doesn't it? And we've got to plan to do it, and we've got to invest the time in that coaching preparation, that coaching listening. It's something I know that I can improve on. It's one of the areas that I think is one of my next areas of focus, I think.
Yeah, and I was thinking that people who become project managers are tend to be problem solvers, like problem solving, good at problem solving, and that's part of the skill set. But the skill set of listening, of actually being really open to different perspectives, and this being able to listen without necessarily needing to agree, but to listen and set your assumptions aside, particularly if you're talking to stakeholders as well as people in the team. It's open, the open questions, the reflecting back what you're hearing so people can know they've been heard. So something like, okay, may I just check I've understood? And then just summarising what you've heard, or reflecting back a few key words, because that helps people feel understood. And I always love Stephen Covey's quote, seek first to understand, then be understood. So, listen first, understand, and then, you can put a different perspective. But if you've understood where someone's coming from, your response is going to be better for lots of reasons, and partly because you might be thinking differently, having heard what they said. It might shift your thinking. Also, it can help you in the way you communicate. You talked about DISC, which I also love as a simple model. So if you get a sense that somebody's got quite a direct style, for example, it's a bit of a clue to you that they don't want to hear you do a lot of thinking aloud. If you can just communicate in a really clear, concise way, that's more likely to get you heard. So it can also give you a sense of how do people communicate, and what clues does that give me about how I might communicate better with them. And I know, I have more of an influence, sort of steady style. I'm on that people side, and somebody very close to me is very much has a direct style. And so I've learned that it's not helpful for me to go in and sort of talk aloud to this individual, because he will look at me and say, okay, just tell me what you want. So I've kind of learned a little bit that I need to do that thinking first. But then if I go in and just say clearly what I want, most of the time I will get it. Yeah. So, I think that the DISC model, I talk about it in my book, the fairly generic model, and I know there's lots of different diagnostics arising from it, but just the basic model just provides a map, doesn't it, for recognising where your style might not be working with others, and therefore how you might make some simple adjustments so that you're understood. And that's more likely to happen if you've started with genuinely being interested in the other person, whether that's your team member or any other stakeholder.
It is that it's something you can use across any interaction that you've got, isn't it? And the first time I ever heard of it was in a family environment, and it was a father and daughter one, the example that Dr. Robert Romm was talking about, and I found it quite. At the time, I really thought it was amazing, and then years later, I've got back into that and realised and started using it a bit more and thinking about it. And I've said it on here before, and I've said it to other people about why I think it works and those kind of models. Simplicity is fundamentally it helps you realise why you think that person's a dickhead and why they think you're a dickhead. And that's it. It's and once you realise why someone would think you're like that, you can adapt to work along with them. And when they're being the way they are, you can sit there and go, oh, it's not me that they're having a go at. It's just or it's not me that they're behaving in a certain way to me. It's just the way they are. It's like the whole someone cutting you up in traffic. They don't even know you. They don't consider you. They are just, all they're considering is they're rushing to get somewhere. They're not bothered about whether they cut you up, because you're not even we all think everything's around us, don't we? And actually, they're not even considering you as an individual or your vehicle. It's just, there's the gap that I'm going for. And it's, when you do that, and it's hard to do, especially in conversations when you've got email or IM and stuff like that, where where you infer meaning, and that meaning comes back on you, where you're going, well, they're thinking this, and then you have someone else read that same email with different emphasis, and you go, oh yeah, maybe that's what they meant, and you don't know, you don't know what it is, and that accept it as it is, and then ask another question, like you were saying there. On email probably isn't a great place, but picking up the phone and have the conversation and going, not sure what you mean. Can you just explain a little bit? Can you explain and try to understand what they mean in that message? Allows you to do exactly what you've said there, doesn't it? It allows you to get behind that, understand what their drivers are, and understand what your reaction needs to be. Whereas sometimes what we'll do is just have a flame war on email. Twitter is the place where you can watch it on a day-to-day basis. And LinkedIn, actually, I find sometimes there are a few cases where I quite sit there on the sidelines watching a few conversations on there. But it's that inherent assumptions and not seeking to understand someone else's point of view and assuming and inferring meaning in their words. It's
Yeah.
it's a hard lesson to learn, though, I think.
And it can be tricky on email. I mean, I think a few things on email. I think this could be helpful on email. You can look at the style of someone's
Yeah,
communication. And
yeah,
I know that if someone writes a very direct email, I'm not going to write back with, "Oh, hi, how was your weekend?" I will reply in kind. Whereas if someone starts with more of a sort of friendly, like, "Oh, I hope I'll tend to mirror back a bit how people write.
yeah, yeah,
I completely agree with you about picking up the phone. If you've got a difficult conversation or if there's something that you're really not sure about, it is far better to pick up the phone. And the other thing that's really helpful is if you are angry or riled up by an email, do not send it. You might type an angry reply of just trying to get everything out of your head, but do not send it. Sleep on it, or at least come back to it after you've had a cup of tea and
yeah.
really
I've got a few in my
reword
drafts
it.
folder.
Yeah, it's not worth building on conflict. And if you can see conflict is starting, because of course it does, however careful you are, things can. But
Yeah,
if you see conflict has started, then have a conversation about it at that stage. Because if you're prepared to intervene early and think, okay, I think there's a misunderstanding here. Shall we just have a chat about this at an earlier stage? It just stops it. Becoming too huge, and you may never agree, but at least you've got the respect of saying to the other person, let's see if we can work this out. And I think respect is really important within a team. And something I'm quite influenced as well, and I've trained with Nancy Klein in the work Time to Think. I don't know if you've come across Time to Think and the thinking environment. I think it's really, really helpful for just for meetings in particular. A lot of her work is based around meetings and how you work with people. And the thinking environment is essentially a set of components or principles that help encourage thinking. And essentially, let's take meetings as an example. Her argument is whatever the purpose of the meeting, and of course, many and varied, fundamentally something you want in all meetings is people to think. Even if it's just a quick briefing meeting, you want people to be engaging with what you're
yeah,
asking them to do. But if it's a meeting that's about, discussing ideas or potentially where you've got disagreements, people seeing things differently, you want to create an environment where, as far as possible, people bring their best thinking to the table. I'm not going to run through all the components, but it's things like part of it is attention. It's giving people, the quality of your attention, which is the really listening. Another component that I think is quite helpful is this one of equality. And the idea is everybody being equal as thinkers. So even in a hierarchical situation where some people have greater decision-making power, for example, everybody is capable of thinking for themselves and contributing. So it's that respect you accord people. And the way you do this in quite practical ways can be things like building rounds into your meeting, so everybody's invited to speak. If you've got just a free-for-all discussion, then research has shown that a minority of people will take up most of the airspace, and the bigger the group, proportionally the smaller number of people who will take up the airspace and things like this. So having some sort of ground rules for meetings so that everybody gets a chance to be heard, really important. So that's another one. So it's about providing everybody in the team with a chance to be heard. Another thing that can be quite helpful, I think, in a team is if you feel you've got a bit too much consensus or a bit too much groupthink going on, is actually invite different views. It's okay, we've heard this and this suggestion. Has anyone got a different view? So, proactively invite in different views, and again, treat views with respect. And if it's not helpful, it might not be helpful, but somebody has spoken up and contributed. So it's at least getting different views on the table.
It's funny. I think, and it's exacerbated with the remoteness of a lot of stuff these days. Is you do that meeting where you have, and I always remember it was always terrible when we used to just have conference call phones, and the people on the end of the phone, you forgot about them. They were not that engaged anyway, and trying to get anything out of people with opinions is quite difficult. And then you'll have those quieter individuals, and then you'll have the gobby ones like me that are happy to say whatever they think. And it's that bringing of those. Now we're in virtual scenarios. You're not looking at someone's eyes. Yeah, you can't. If they put the video on, even then it's not the same. And getting those people who are a little bit disengaged in that meeting, in that conversation, what sort of things can you do? I know you can kind of go, right, what's your opinion? What do you think? Have you got anything to add? As two closed questions there, isn't it? It's kind of what leaving open questions, but it's what kind of things would you recommend? Because I know it's the creeping death sometimes on like an update call, where it's just like feels like you're pulling teeth to try and get people to engage with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there's a few things. I think firstly, it's about the preparation. And I would say, again, it depends on the context, but good preparation isn't asking people to read masses and masses of stuff, because quite likely half the people won't have done it and people weren't on the same page. But I think that something that's really useful in preparation is thinking about what the questions that we're going to ask, so that people have got a chance to think about some of the questions in advance. In fact, one of Nancy Klein's tips is to phrase the agenda items in the form of questions that we're going to answer.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to agendas as well, you know, if you've got just a standing agenda that you do every time, it can get stale quite quickly, or parts of it cannot be relevant. So really think about what's the purpose of the meeting, and therefore what is an agenda and a format that could work. So, you know, if you've fallen into a bit of a habit and you feel like it's not working, you know, take a step back for the basic. What are we actually trying to do in this meeting? I think a couple of things as well. Sometimes if you've got maybe a question, give people a couple of minutes to maybe think about it and make some notes, because that will give the people who like a bit more processing, maybe more of the S and C types in a meeting, a bit of time to actually think what they're going to say, rather than putting them too much on the spot. The other thing I would say, you know, if you have got an update round, I think it is, depending on the numbers, of course, I think it's good practice to invite everybody to contribute, but are also okay in some contexts. If people haven't got anything, they could just pass. You know, it's not about pushing people that they have to say something. It's more about making sure that people aren't overlooked, and you're not having a situation where it's always the same more extrovert people who are contributing and everybody else is not. Numbers of people at meetings as well. You know, what's the best number? If you've got quite a few things to cover, is it better to have sort of smaller meetings and just have the key people in the room or on the call? You know, shorter, sharper meetings are usually better than long ones, even if you've got a couple of, maybe need to split it into a couple of meetings.
It's interesting, because it's a couple of things you're saying there is like, I think about I suppose I look at it, and it's kind of trying to do things quickly and easily. You look around the table and you ask for everyone to give a contribution, and one person never contributes, say. Well, they've given the opportunity to contribute. If they're not engaged and they're not contributing, I suppose the thing is that needs to be a one-to-one conversation with that individual about their contribution, doesn't it? That's the step that I would have to take, is go to each of these people and say, right, I'm concerned that I'm trying to give you a voice. You're not taking that opportunity to have that voice in the meeting. What is it that's stopping you? And you know, I suppose that out of the back of that, there could be conflict with someone else. It could be even something where, well, I was shut down once before, therefore why bother? Because John always shuts me down. You know, there may be something from 10 years ago. You just don't know, do you? And asking that, I suppose it's spotting that, and that consciousness of what's going on, and listening and trying to understand why that person isn't engaging. But again, it's that, and that's the kind of thing is where I think goes back to our first point when we were talking about that new manager thing of the task, the team, and the individual. It's being, if you're focusing on, you've got to have the time to do those interactions with people as a manager. Therefore, you've got to make room to be able to go, oh, I need to go and talk to that person and understand why they're not involved. And if all you're doing is operational and running the business rather than managing the people, that's not going to work, is it?
It's not. And I think obviously one of the barriers to having those one-to-ones can be the idea it might take a lot of time. And it doesn't necessarily, can be quite a short check-in, quick piece of feedback, just, keep it focused on a topic. But just having those one-to-one conversations is where you build the relationship, really. And so I think it's definitely worth doing, and it doesn't need to be, a full hour one-to-one every time. It can just be a check-in. And it's working virtually, you don't get some of those, management by walking around type of opportunities. So you might need to create them, but just keep it quite brief. And, we sort of so used, aren't we, to putting meetings in hour or half hour sort of slots, but they don't need to be that long. You could do shorter ones. In fact, it's really good to finish meetings before the hour, say, so that people they're not going back to back meetings, because it's probably partly as well why people don't engage if they just haven't had any time between meetings. So that's another thing as well, thinking, doesn't have to be an hour, it doesn't have to be half an hour, it can be, a shorter period of time.
Yeah, I see that. I think it was last year that Outlook, Microsoft, if people use the Outlook, there was a setting you can put it in there now that it doesn't default to half-hour meetings or 15-minute or hour meetings. It knocks 5 minutes off for every one. So if you book a half-hour meeting, it's 25 minutes. And the pop-up saying this meeting's going to end in 5 minutes comes at 20 past. So if you manage it and follow it to that level, you do that by default. And I've starting to, before I wasn't there originally, but I'm starting to feel I am more often treating that as it does end at 25 past rather than at half past. And I find that a really useful way of trying to do it. I did try doing the other way, where I was going to start meetings 5 minutes later so that people had a chance coming out of other meetings. But then everyone with Teams pop up saying, "Oh, this meeting's starting." Everyone joins early anyway, so it's kind of defeating the object. But I think that whole thing of getting the team engaged, getting people engaged in meetings. No one wants to be in meetings, but there seems to be more meetings. It is a big difficulty for, again, and what you do as a manager, you're trying to go, I don't want my team sat in meetings all day because they won't be able to get any work done. But I need them in meetings in order for work to get done. And you've got that difficult conundrum. I know there was one where we'd have 4 streams of work running, and we needed to have a stand up and on each of those streams. Now we could have one big one, which lots of people would have had come in and gone or whatever, but there were some people who we needed for all of those meetings, and they were going to meeting after meeting after meeting. But because of their role, it was spread across quite a few things. To them, it felt like they were in meetings all the time. But we still needed them there, because if they weren't there, the teams that needed their expertise wouldn't get that expertise. But if we tried to do it all in one go, that meant that we had to bring everyone. Yeah, it's difficult. I don't think there's one answer. It's never going to be perfect, is it? Let's just go for it.
It's not. And it does always come back to, what's the purpose of this meeting? Does it need to be a meeting? I mean, sometimes it does. And not losing that stepping back.
Yeah, another meeting that could have been an email kind of conversation.
Yeah,
but then no one would have read the email. That's the problem, isn't it?
If they need to provide a piece of information, could you record the first time they do it, and then essentially play it in future and have people, any questions, we can feed them back. And I mean, I don't know if that would work. I've just come up with it at the top of my head, but it's it's always worth thinking creatively about other ways you could do it.
Yeah, and I think we don't take the time to do that, do we? Sometimes it is a case of, if you have got it's quite often I'll see stuff where it's coming out and they're kind of all hands kind of type things, and I'm like, can you record it? And it gets recorded, but it isn't default recorded. But some more of them are getting like that now, because then I will not go to it, because if I don't need to, if I'm just consuming, I'm not contributing, I can pull that down. I can run it at 1.5 speed, and that information I can gather quicker than I would be if I was on live, or I can put it once in. You mean you can do those sort of things where you can speed up the consumption of a lot of stuff, or with the auto transcription stuff that goes on, you
Yeah.
skim read this transcription, which you can skim read a transcription and 10 times as fast as you can watch the video, and you can go through, oh, that bit, click, play that bit of video. That's the bit I need to listen to. But I think we're still at that point where we're not quite got all those. Just thinking, I'm looking there with your book in the background there, and we've touched on it a little bit. And we've been going nearly 50 minutes now. Tell us a little bit about why bother writing a book? It's not easy. It's not simple. There's a lot of emotional investment in it and doubt and things like that with every book that we write. So why, and what are the benefits in there? Give us a little outline of it, etc.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yes. Well, I suppose the why, wanting to try and pull together, I think, a lot of what I've learned over the years into one place. So, a project that would be quite satisfying, but would also provide a resource. So it is designed to be quite a practical resource. And the sort of idea that helped me put it all together was this structure, which I've called, connecting in 3 dimensions, which is essentially this idea that you start with connecting with yourself, and it's with every conversational relationship you have, at work and outside, you are always part of that dynamic.
Yeah.
So you are, and you are the only person who can make a change in yourself and how you react with people. So it starts with really asking you, and this bit of the book's had quite a lot of love actually, this idea that you connect with yourself. And I've started off with just connecting with the present moment, because when our minds are in the future or the past, we're not there with ourself and how we're reacting in the moment. And I've looked at things. I look a little bit about values, because I think that's so important, the stories you tell yourself, and in that bit as well, I've talked about things like metaphor and, what kind of metaphors do you use and how they shape how you see the world, because I have trained in an interesting methodology called symbolic modelling, which I won't talk about in a lot of detail now, but essentially it's understanding that, often by understanding the metaphors we use, we can get a sense of, how we see the world. And if we can shift those metaphors a little, we can make a shift quite deep level. So it's quite interesting, and I talk about that a little bit in the book.
Kind of like self-talk, isn't it? That sounds a little bit like the fact that the stories that you're telling yourself, you're telling others, you're telling yourself, aren't you? Sounds like.
Yeah, and it's recognizing that they are just stories, and because we've talked before, haven't we, on this conversation about self-awareness, and I've used the phrase in that the observing self, which is taken from ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training, which is an evidence-based psychology, but it has some interesting ideas in it, and one of them is this, you can connect with a part of yourself that can kind of observe yourself and say, okay, so I'm thinking that, but that is just a thought in a way. There could be another way of thinking. So you can have those mindset shifts, but you can be connected with yourself, and you can notice and think, there's this sort of noticing and naming approach. Okay, notice I'm thinking or having the thought that this is a difficult person. Okay, I notice I'm having that thought. That is just a thought. So what would be a more productive thought? And when it comes to sort of changing your mindset or thoughts, you need to change it to something that's believable. So it's like, okay, I might not suddenly say, oh, this person is, I love having a conversation with this person, because it's not true. But you can say, okay, I'm going to prepare for this conversation. I am going to ask myself, what's the best way of communicating with this individual based on how I've observed? What can I do to make likelihood of success? So, you can change the way you think without having to sort of say something that isn't true. You need to, once you've noticed you're having a thought isn't productive, you can say, okay, what would be a better way to approach this conversation?
Yeah.
Is this making sense?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of that getting behind your own assumptions, isn't it?
Yeah. And it starts with noticing them. And when you notice that you're thinking in a certain way, and it's how you think, but there are other ways of approaching potentially the conversation, or are other ways of seeing a situation. And of course, one of the ways you can get those different perspectives is by asking people in a two-way. But you can also, we all have different parts. We all have, the part of ourselves that can be quite calm and think about something. We also have the part of ourselves that can get quite riled up. So, just recognizing that, if we're calm and sort of look at what we're doing from that, just that more the observing self. I like that phrase because it is just that part of us that is a little bit calmer and is not too caught up in emotions. So it's just taking a step back, really. So that's the first aspect. The second part is connecting with. So that's more the interpersonal communication. So I start with listening because I think that's really fundamental. I've got quite a lot on questions and how to ask great open questions. A little bit on non-verbal communication. I talk about DISC in that section and how you can adapt your style. So it covers, a range of different approaches, but always from this core idea that it's about connecting and listening and treating other people with respect. Got a bit on assertiveness too, how you can step up, stand up for yourself. And the third part is looking at the networks and communities that you're part of. I've called that connecting beyond. So it's basically, what am I part of that is bigger than me? And on a practical level, that could be things like mapping your network, whether from that's a career perspective or however you want to do it. So I think for project managers and, anyone, it's really useful to think, am I connected with the right people? Am I part of worthwhile professional networks? Am I part of networks with people maybe outside my immediate professional or sector who could bring in interesting ideas? Have I got enough people that I can actually talk to if things are getting tough? So it's thinking about that, really, your support structure and how you contribute, but also how you, what can nurture and support you.
Interesting.
And they're all linked.
Yeah, that networks side of it kind of draws again to our sort of new into roles and the changed approach where we've got hybrid working in organisations, and how I've been in my organisation for about 19 years now. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I've got a lot of connections. I've got a wide network, both internally to my organisation. I know I can pick the phone up pretty much any situation. I'll find someone who knows someone in my organisation to find out who I need to talk to. But some of the new joiners into the organisation, whether they be new to career or new to the organisation itself, don't have that network. And the way they would have built that network is bumping into people at a coffee shop, bumping into, at a coffee machine, chatting to someone they do know, and someone says, "Oh, have you met?" "Oh, that," and build that and bumping in that way. Whereas now you've got to manufacture those situations, and as a give point of view from us as that's more experienced and more with the wider networks, it took me a while to realise why there was any value in me going into the office, because I could pick up the phone to anyone, I can get stuff done without being face to face, because it's a trek and so on. But then it was pointed out to me it's not about me. Very, very rarely is, and it's about the fact that rest of the organisation, we will lose that connectivity, we will lose that sense of belonging, and people will come into the organisation and feel, and any organisation now, there is that chance of loneliness, isolation, not feeling part of the organisation. And then in all industries and all businesses, we're going to get that churn of people because we will be seeking that belonging, because that's what you do. You want we're all what they're called, I've got a gang, clans, whatever it is. My brain's going on that. We seek that community, don't we? And if we don't find it, you'll try and find it somewhere else. Whereas it used to be, you'd end up going to work, you'd work with people, you work with your team, and that becomes your community, for good and for bad. but it becomes that community, and then there's a bit of a wider community, but that first community is much harder to do. And I've seen it since COVID, that creation of those communities where you've changed organisation, moved the organisation around, put some new people together in a new team. It's taken much longer to get them feeling like they're a team working together.
Yeah.
So that networks is amazing.
It's really interesting, and it links back to psychological safety as well, this idea of belonging, and feeling excluded, not feeling part of something can in some ways be as painful as physical pain. We really do. We are social beings. We really need to feel part of something. And so for a project management team lead, and it is really important to help people feel part of a team. And I just think a few things. I mean, I think bringing people together, even if it's not day to day, if people don't need to be face to face day to day, something that I personally think with just coming from the perspective of someone who's been involved in training, is that actually some good training courses as a really good way to bring people together, because you're learning together and people love it. I've found, I do a lot of my work online now, but people still want me to come in and deliver a course because they like getting together. They like the opportunity to learn and have conversations, and almost again taking that step back. I mean, this is a bit of a theme as well, whether it's about meetings or whether it's about your own thinking, taking that step back out of the day to day and working on challenges or problems, whatever the topic of the training is, but applying that to work. So how might this model help me to manage this situation better? And I think that can be really helpful. The other thing I would say, even if you've got, say, team meetings that are group meetings, can you use the breakout rooms and actually have some one-to-one conversations or three-way conversations in those as well? Because if it's all in a big group, some people get a bit lost. But if you can have some breakouts, it's surprising, even if you just 5 to 10 minutes to get maybe 2 or 3 people to talk about something as a small group, which you might do in a training course, but you can use similar techniques in meetings as well. It just helps people to start to get to know people, and so I think one of the things you really need to be doing and asking yourself as a team leader as well is, how can I help people feel connected to the different people in the team, the different individuals, and trying to build in ways to do that are also productive and linked to work as well. It doesn't have to be a completely separate team away day that people can be a bit cynical about those. It's more about, how can I find ways to build that in that are also working towards the task, but they're also working towards the individual development and the team dynamic. You can kind of get all keeping that model in mind as but what will help develop all three at the same time.
I'd like that. And it's as you say, that face-to-face training thing, I've always found that I'm one of these people that, surprisingly enough, when it's a face-to-face training thing, I like being there. I like sitting near the front. I like getting involved. I'm annoying to the instructor usually because I'm quips and jabbering away. But I find the energy in the room of something like that gives me energy. It re-energizes me. It gives you that breakaway. And I am a person who goes all in those scenarios. I'm out of the office. It's very rare that I'll be dealing with stuff going on when I'm on something like that. I'll pick it up later. And I see other people who are in between every break, they're on the phone. At lunch, they've gone off, they're eating on. And for me, that face-to-face training is more than the things you're being taught. You learn so much from other people's points of view. And then if you've got a team together and you're chatting about the stuff you've gone there, that builds those bonds of those teams, because they're going, well, even if they disagree entirely with the training that's going on, they're bonding over that training being different and they're understanding each other more. And I think that it's a fantastic point to make there, is having those face-to-face. And I'm thinking we've got stuff we're thinking about in the future for next year. And it's finding excuses to get everyone together is what there. And it's kind of all rather, and encouraging people to do that Now, sometimes you say, well, we're going to do face-to-face. We have to do face-to-face. If you shape the nature of that training to be face-to-face, that means that it wouldn't work virtually. But it's still hard to get people to come in and do that, because there's always someone who's, again, it's individuals, isn't it, where they go, I'm too busy, I can't take time away from the job. And they can, but they just choose not to, really. And they don't, the consequences of the taking that time away, they're not willing to accept. I'm just realising the clock's just ticked over onto an hour. I told you we'd talk for a while, didn't I? The book, obviously, those 3 parts of that book sounds fascinating, to be able to give that inward thinking, that connections for what you need to do in that wider connection. I love the way that you've done that. I love the idea of compartmentalizing those, and that give back to the communities and things as well, where, as you say, when you're networking wider, and how they influence, but how you can exert influence on those environments as well, because by exerting something onto those networks, you'll get something back off those. And I've found that myself, when you contributed, you get something back. And it's like with being volunteering with the PMI. I've got some really good friends that from 20 years ago, that just because we were volunteering on PMI and helping run events and things like that. And it's it does feed back in different ways to the way that maybe you think it would. But again, it'll feed back negatively in environments that you maybe should choose to step away from, or limit your exposure to. But thinking about all that in the book and all that sort of thing, was there anything that we haven't discussed, because obviously there's rabbit holes we've gone down, that you would have liked to have mentioned either about the book, or about the things that you're doing, or the maybe future events or anything like that?
No, I feel we have covered quite a lot. I mean, my core message, I think, when it comes to interpersonal communication, is about that connecting with people. So it's, yes, you've got some kind of message you want to communicate, and it may be task focused, but actually taking a bit of time to connect with somebody, to listen, to understand. So I've mentioned that before, but that I suppose is my core message. Particularly if you're very task focused, clearly we're all at work to complete task, deliver the project, whatever it might be. But the way you do that is actually to develop your ability to work with the people that are on the project. And that's, that fundamentally is what will contribute to this success. Once you're a manager, what matters is your ability to work with people. And the starting point for that is understanding yourself and being open to what others are had to contribute.
Yeah, that openness, you say, being open is so important, isn't it? So if people want to find more information, carry on the conversation, etc., what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Okay, I think there's a couple of ways. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite easy to find. Felicity Dwyer. I think that's just my LinkedIn name. So, do find me there, connect with me, maybe mention the podcast if you want to connect. The other thing, I do have my own website, which is felicitydwyer.com. So I've got information there about, some of the courses and things that I offer. I do offer one-to-one coaching as well. And of course, if you're interested in a book on communication, that hopefully is very practical, it's got sort of practical ideas in every chapter, then Crafting Connection, Transform How You Communicate with Yourself and Others. Obviously, it's on Amazon, but it's on all the other online bookshops as well, in printed and in e-format. So, that's an easy and inexpensive way to read some of what I've hopefully learned over the years.
I'll stick a link in the show notes for anyone who wants to grab a copy of that anyway. So you should jump along onto that. Well, in which case, all I have to say is, Felicity, thank you for a fascinating conversation. And we'll no doubt speak again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Nigel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.